Welcome back, Cat 37 surfacing class. We are going to cover swept surfaces. We're going to focus for this video on explicit profile surfaces. In the next video, we'll do implicit. Okay, so before we get started, let's go to the lecture notes. All right, so we're going to be using the swept command, which is next to or below the offset command. Okay, so we're going to be creating explicit sweeps. Okay, so we're going to generate a surface using a profile. Okay, so we're going to use a profile. In this case, this head and shoulders looking curve. And in the next video, we're going to be using implicit profiles, meaning you don't pick a profile. CATIA will automatically generate the profile, whether it's linear. So you can just tell CATIA to go with the linear profile, a circular, or conic like hyperbolic, parabolic, or other conic shapes like elliptical, circular also. So if you don't see this icon on your CATIA software or at work, that means you have the basic license of generative shape design. You need to pay extra to have some of the add-ons like this one. So if you're at work and you don't see this option, then ask your boss, hey, do we have the advanced generative shape design license? I think it's the XD2 or 2DX license. Most likely maybe they'll have one license with the advanced options, and you have to and only one person can use it at a time. So you're gonna have to ask if it's available, and if so, do I have access to it? If somebody's already using it, you gotta ask them to release the license so that you can get access to it. All right. So today we're gonna focus on this video with explicit, meaning we're gonna provide the profile. Okay, so we will provide the profile, and then we can use guides to guide us along to generate a surface. This is very similar to extrude. It's instead of being a linear extrude, we're going to use guide curves to help shape it. So that as far as the width, it can go wider, it can go narrower. So it's going to control the surface as it sweeps across. It's important to note that the guide curves need to intersect the profile. If there's a gap between the guide curve and the profile, it's not going to work. It has to intersect. So guide curves have to intersect the profile, or else CATIA will reject that as a guide curve. Another thing is spine. So you need to control the surface as it's sweeping across. Think of it as pulling on it to give it some shape. Just think of your spine, right? So when somebody tells you, hey, have a backbone, right? Stand straight. If your spine is weak, you're just going to flop all over the place, right? So you want to stand up straight, have a backbone, and help guide that surface. In your case, it would be the skin, right? In your torso, on your torso. So same idea. Another way to explain swept surfaces, and later on we're going to cover lofting, also referred as the multi-section surfacing. Best way to explain this is by a covered wagon. Okay, so we're going to use a profile. So for swept surfaces, explicit, we're going to have our own profile. And we're going to sweep it across. And we can use these, sills, these pieces of wood here, going straight as our guide. Okay, so this will guide it along. So it'll guide it along. And to give it a smoother shape, we can pull on it, right? We can pull on it to make this straighter, and that'll be our spine. Later on, when we do the multi-section lofting, we're going to be using multiple profiles. You can use one, two, or a bunch of them. And again, the covered wagon is the best example to use when describing swept surfaces or lofting surfaces. All right, so let's go back. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up the file. Okay, so sweep number 1. And let's go ahead and open it in CATIA. Should already have CATIA open. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on here. So I'm going to hide some of these geosets. There's just way too many geosets, which is fine. So this is going to be a long tutorial. As you can see by all the geosets, let me turn off geoset 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to focus on geoset 1. And let's go ahead and insert our own geoset. My geoset. And I'm going to make the surfaces a little darker. So I'm going to right click properties. You don't have to change the color if you don't want. I'm going to pick, instead of the vanilla color, I'm going to pick something softer. I like to use a soft green or blue. It's just easier on the eye. All right, so this is going to be our profile. Okay, going back. So we're going to pick a profile. Okay, so this is the way I have it oriented in my lecture notes. You don't have to rotate this if you don't want to. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up the geoset. So this is profile number 1. So here, whoever made this up, this cat part, this file, took the time to label. And you should do the same thing. You can always right-click properties if you want to rename any of your geometry. Go to feature properties and give it a different name. Okay, so this person did a good job of labeling. Okay, so there's profile 1, profile 2, and the yellow curves should be the guide curves. Let me go up. Okay, so here's guide curve number 1 and guide curve number 2. And I'm assuming these straight lines are going to be our spines. So we have that option to use these as spines. Then we have this curve here. Don't know what we're going to do with this spline yet. Okay, so let's go ahead and start a sweep. Okay, make sure you are in generative shape design. If you're not in generative shape design, go to start, shape, generative shape design, right? All right, so let's go ahead and click on the sweep command. So below the offset, we have sweep. So sweep. And pick the first option, which is the explicit, meaning you're going to pick the profile. If you go with implicit, linear, circular, conic, you don't actually pick a profile. It'll automatically generate one in the background. Okay, so if you don't see this last option, that means you have the basic license and not the advanced license. All right, so let's go ahead and do the explicit option. Make sure it's selected. And for our profile, we're going to pick the first one here. Let me go to the first option with reference surface. Okay, there it is. And there's just so many options. We're not going to have time to cover all of them. We'll just learn the basics because we can spend hours on this tutorial alone. All right, so we're just going to learn the basics of this tutorial. Okay, so we have a profile and we have a guide curve. Okay, so let's pick the first guide curve. Let's see which is the first one. Here it is, guide number 1. Okay, so we have a profile and our guide curve, just like the covered wagon, right? We have our profile and this sill here, like a windowsill, is our guide. Okay, and let's see what type of covered wagon, what type of shape we get out of this canvas. Right, so let's go back and let's go ahead and do a preview, and there it is. There's our surface. Notice I have neon lights turned on. View lighting. So go to view lighting. You can go with the single light, no lights, single light, 2 lights, right? You can pull on the bars to change the direction of the light, or we can go neon lights. Okay, so I'll go with neon so you can see the shape. See how clean it is. But you know what, I'll just go back down to 1 light, and then at the end we can always go back and actually, you know what, I'll leave them on. I'm going to leave on the neon lights because it's easier to see how the shape changes. And okay, see how clean those reflection lines look. And again, if you're driving on the freeway, you're going through a tunnel, look at the way the lights reflect off of the other cars, but drive safely, right? Don't get too distracted. And see how when you're driving through a tunnel, the cars ahead of you or next to you, how the lights reflect off of their surfaces. That's why when you see these car shows, whether it's Misfit Garage or Bad Chad's Restorations or Resto Garage or Fast and Loud, when they mention painting a car black, a shiny black color, you see all the blemishes. Any mistake on the body of the car, you'll see it on the reflection lines. All right, so there's our first attempt to sweep, right? Let's see what we get if we use a different guide curve. So here right now we only have the option to pick one guide curve. Let's go back to guide curve and pick this one and see what we get in 3, 2, 1. Pick it. Don't blink. Preview. Look at the reflection lines in 3, 2, 1. Preview. See how we get a different type of surface when we use this as our guide curve. Now we're not picking a surface as a reference, but we can pick a surface. If there was a surface out here, we can use it to help guide the surface along. Okay, so currently we don't have a surface as a default. Or actually, it's just going to pick an average plane as its default, but we can pick a surface to guide along our new surface. Think of it as extending an existing surface. All right, so that is profile with a single guide curve. Let's go with 2 guide curves. See what we get, 2 guide curves. All right, so we already have a guide curve here. You know what, let me reselect the guide curves. Let's go to guide curve number 1. We're going to keep the same profile, profile 1. For guide curve 1, let's pick guide curve 1. For guide curve 2, let's pick guide curve number 2. Okay, so now we have 2 guide curves, right? And once again, the guide curves have to intersect the profile. If it doesn't, if there's a gap between the profile and the guide curves, it'll give you an error message. Okay, so let's see what we get with 2 guide curves. And oh, one thing to note. So this is my first guide curve. Notice it's telling me that's your first guide curve. That's also our spine. If we don't pick a spine, it'll automatically pick the first guide curve as our spine. So currently our spine is going to take on this shape and not this one. Okay, so let's go ahead and preview. And notice how this is just a warning. Hey, double check this is what you're looking for. Okay, as far as the result. Okay, so see how it changes in shape when we're using 2 guide curves. Okay, I'm going to hit OK and accept it. Okay, in the wireframe tutorial, we learned how to create our own spine. Let's see if we can go back. See if I can find this option. So we can create our own spine. If we go back to spline, go to the drop down, spine. Here it is, spine. Okay, so we can use 2 guides. Let's go to guides. We can use guide number 1 and guide number 2 to generate our own spine. So here it is. See how it takes the average of the 2 almost? It's almost like the average of these 2 spines. So we're generating this spine. And hit OK. Let me give it a different color. Right-click properties so it stands out. Let's go ahead and pick something bright. Let's go to magenta. Okay, so there's our spine that we created. Okay, so if we go back to our swept surface, okay, so again, we created our own spine. Let's go to our swept surface. Let's see what we get when we pick our own spine. So instead of using guide number 1 as the default spine, so once again, if you don't pick a spine, it'll default to the first guide curve. So let's now pick our new one. And in 3, 2, 1, preview. And it slightly changes the shape a bit, right? Okay, so it gives us a nice clean sweep. Now we don't have to pick our curved spine. We can pick a straight line or an axis. In this case, the x-axis. X is going along the length of the sweep. So you can see x-axis. Or we can pick the straight yellow line. So for spine, let's see what we get when we pick this linear line here. And in 3, 2, 1, preview. And it slightly changes the shape. This is just a warning letting you know, hey, are you sure this is the shape you want? Yeah. Okay, so the straighter the spline, the more of a pull in this x direction, x-axis direction. Okay, so relimiters. Okay, so I'm going to put a point on our spine. Okay, so I can create things on the fly. I can just right click, create a point. I'm going to put a point on this spine. And you know what? I'll put it in the middle. So it's putting a point right in the middle of the spine. You can always give it a ratio if you want. Okay. So what does that do? It's going to change the length of this sweep with respect to this relimiter. So I created a relimiter. You don't have to do this part. Most likely you'll never use it, but it's a handy little option. So watch what happens when I hit preview. 3, 2, 1, don't blink. See, it limits where it starts. By putting a point, this is the starting point. If I was to put another point on the spine, a second point, then it'll just go up to that second relimiter, right? I'm going to go ahead and remove that relimiter. Right click and clear selection. Go back to preview and it'll go the full length, right? Starting at the profile. Okay, so let me close. And notice how this is very similar to extrude. Our first video for surfaces, we did extrude, but extrude is straight. When you do swept surfaces, they tend to be non-linear, right? They tend to sweep all over the place, change direction, or change in width. Okay, another thing we have are anchors. You don't have to play around with these anchors. Typically, you leave them alone, but let me show you what happens if I change the anchors. So it automatically creates its own anchor points. So our first anchor point should be where our first guide curve and profile intersect. So here's our first anchor. Here's our second anchor, or it'll just compute one for you. Okay, so this most likely would be our second anchor point if there was one, where the second guide curve and the profile intersect. Watch what happens when I create my own anchor points. So the anchor point is going to be a starting point for the surface. Almost similar to relimiters, very similar, except anchor points will allow you to change the starting point of the sweep and even the orientation. Watch what happens when, instead of making this my anchor 1 along guide curve 1, I'm going to follow guide curve 2. So I'm going to make this my anchor point number 1. Let's see what happens. Anchor point number 1. Okay. And anchor point number 2 is going to be along guide number 1. So I'm flipping them, right? Click. So there's anchor 2. Okay, so I reverse the anchor points. Okay, watch what happens. Preview in 3, 2, 1, preview. It flips it, right? It changed the orientation because I swapped the anchor points. Instead of letting CATIA allowing it to compute the anchor points, I picked them. So not only did it change the orientation, right? It also changes the starting point. Let's see if I make this point the second. So instead of making this anchor point 2, let's go back to anchor point 2 here and pick this one. Let's see what happens. See if it accepts it. And preview 3, 2, 1. Whoa, and it changes direction. So it really went, so it changed the orientation completely, as you can see. That's not what I was expecting, but I'm just going to go ahead and clear the anchor points. Just be aware that it'll change the starting. You can even have a anchor point with direction. I'll let you play around with those. You will rarely have to change these, so I'm just going to go ahead and clear this. Right click, clear, and let CATIA compute one and preview. Go back to the computed one. All right. Okay, another thing is if you were to change guide curve 1, if you were to swap these, so if you make guide number 2 your first guide curve and guide number 1 your second, it will also give it a different shape, just so you're aware. And think of it as tugging on the canvas. So if you go back to the picture of the covered wagon, again, think of the guide curve as shaping it along the windowsill, right? If you take this windowsill and give it an outward arc, the canvas is gonna follow outward, right? Or if you go inward, right? So same idea. Okay, so let's go back to the tutorial. Okay, so we've been playing around with sweep. If you want to stop here, that's fine. You'll still get the full credit. If you want to practice more sweep, again, sweep is very complex. If you want expert level, if you want to be an expert in surfacing, you definitely have to work with swept surfaces. And I'm not going to cover these portions here, but sometimes when a surface has a tight turn and it starts to overlap on its own, you can put a setback where it pretty much chops that area. Think of when you're tailoring a shirt or a jacket or a nice suit, and you're transitioning from the sleeve to the main body of the suit to the collar of the suit. It's gonna have trouble transitioning from one to the other, especially when you have a tight turn. So you can increase the setback where it'll remove the areas where it overlaps as it's trying to sweep and make a tight turn. Okay. So you can play around with setbacks. If it's not going around that tight curve, you can increase the setback percentage. All right, so we've been creating our sweeps. Let's see if in this tutorial they have a surface to reference. It looks like they don't. Okay, so let me go back before we continue. Let me just accept the results. I'll accept them. Let's see if we have a surface back here that we can use as a reference. Well, we can use this one. So this one. Hey, here's an extrude surface. An extruded surface. Let me turn it on. Okay, so there it is. We have an extruded surface, as you can see. Now our first profile, it's not making contact, at least at the top, with the surface. Let's see if we use this as our reference surface, see if it accepts it, see if we get anything out of it. Now we'll try the second profile below it. So currently we're at the top, profile number 1. Profile number 1. Okay, so let's see what happens if I go back, double click on this surface, our surface. And instead of 2 guides, let's go to reference surface. Let's see what happens if I pick this extruded surface as my reference. Okay, so there's my reference. Okay, so I'm going to pick this extruded surface as my reference surface. In 3, 2, 1, select it. And let's hit preview, see if it accepts it. Oh, doesn't like it. Oh, it seems to maybe like it, right? It's actually taking it and making it straighter. And hit OK. Nope, didn't work. Okay, so I'm gonna notice we have an error message. It didn't like it. So I can always hit undo. Hey, undo, undo, right? Or Control Z. Let me undo. Okay, so it didn't like it. So let me leave this green surface alone, and I'm going to create a new one. Let me hide this one. Okay, so instead of profile number 1, I'm going to pick profile number 2. Profile number 2. If it doesn't like this surface, then we'll try it on a different one. Okay, so let me hide this extruded surface for now. Hide this one. Okay, so now we're gonna do a sweep with the second profile, profile number 2. So let's go ahead and sweep profile number 2 with surface reference. And we'll use, let's see, guide number 1. And preview. There it is. There's our new surface. Okay, and let's see if I can see if it accept that extruded surface. Let me go to the background. Let me right click and show this extruded surface. Go back. Let's see if it'll accept it as a reference. And preview. Oh, doesn't like it. Okay, so we're just gonna skip this part for now. Doesn't like it. Or I may be putting the wrong inputs. So we'll just skip this portion of it, clear. I'll just cancel out. Okay. Let's go back to our first sweep. We'll try it with a different surface later on. Not this tutorial, one of the other ones. We will be using surfaces as a reference in the next video. All right, so that failed. It's okay. Either it didn't accept it or I was not giving it the right inputs. All right, so let's continue on. Okay, so we did with 2 guide curves already, right? We did the 2 guide curves, guide curve number 1, number 2. And we did use a spine, right? We used a spine. We talked about anchor points. Again, anchor points allows you to change the orientation or direction of the sweep. All right, so now we're going to do a different one. We're going to use this one. If the profile is manually positioned, define anchor points will position the profile between the guides, matching the anchor points with the guide intersection points. All right, so we're going to use anchor 1, anchor 2, and guide curve. Trying to figure out if it's using the same surface or a different one. Okay, so it looks like we're going to use this as our profile while using the same guide curves. Okay, so we're going to switch our profile to this one while using the same guide curves, same spine, and we have our anchor points. All right, so let's give this a try. If I get stuck, we'll just move on to the next one. All right, so let's go back to CATIA. Okay, so we're going to use this as our profile. Let me change the color of this sketch. It's difficult to see. All right, so let's go ahead and double click on this, swept number 1. Okay, and that's the one we created with 2 guide curves. Okay, so let's see what happens if I change our profile to this one. Hit preview. And it's generating the surface. Now remember earlier I said the guide curves have to intersect the profile? Well, I need to correct that. As long as the guide curves intersect, so see how they're in the same plane? See where this guide curve ends? At the same plane location as our sketch. Okay, so this over here on the right is a sketch, as you can see, sketch number 2. Now, if these guide curves were slightly shorter and not going through this plane. So it looks like a lot of these profiles were actually created on this plane here. Same thing with the sketch. So as long as the guide curves intersect through this plane, it will accept the guide curves. If they fall short, chances are it will not because of the gap. All right, so there it is. And let's see what happens when we pick our anchor points. So let's go back. Okay, so it's telling us to use this as anchor point number 2. And I don't see anchor point number, oh, there's anchor point number 1. Let me zoom in. I'm going to hit Control, roll the wheel to zoom in. Okay, so anchor 1 is probably this point. It's hard to tell. I don't see the pointer. Okay, so we'll just guess on anchor number 1. Okay, so I'm thinking once again, anchor point number 1 is this one. And anchor point number 2 is this one. And preview. Oh, didn't like it. Let me pick a different anchor number 1. Let's make this anchor number 1. So select here first. Preview. Whoa, get a different shape, right? All right, so this is something that's very complex. Even I'm getting confused. This is more advanced than I expected. So once again, this is a very complex command. If you want to do something straightforward, then just stick with the profiles that intersect the guide curves. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this and leave it alone. But you do have the option, right, to change the profile and sweep from one or the other. Very advanced command. All right, so let's move on. Let me hit Control key and roll the wheel to zoom out. Okay, so we covered a lot of this stuff already. Yeah, we already swept the other profile. Okay, with pulling direction. Okay, so you can sweep with the pulling direction. So that's the third option. So you can go to the drop down and pick the pulling direction. Let's see what it picks as the pulling direction here. So we're going to recreate the surface again. I'm trying to find where the pulling direction is. I'm having trouble seeing it here. Okay, there's direction. For direction, oh, it says to pick the ZX plane. So it's going to go, I'm assuming it's going to go normal to the ZX plane for direction. Okay, so here's our direction, the ZX plane. Okay, so let's try it again. So we'll use our profile, guide curve, spine, and our direction will be the ZX plane for direction. Okay, so let's give that a try. Okay, so let me hide this surface. Let's recreate the swept surface. So let's go to sweep once again. And we're going to go with pulling direction. So we'll pick our profile. Let's pick this second profile. I'll leave it up to you. Profile number 2. Okay, so I'm going to use this as our guide curve. And we're going to use this one as our spine. Okay, so our spine will be guide curve number 2. So guide 2 will be our spine. Okay, and our direction will be the XY plane. Okay, so there's the XY plane. So I'm assuming it's going to go normal. You can also pick a line for direction. Okay, so instead of picking a plane, we could have always picked one of these straight lines. So let's pick direction normal to XY plane. And you can see it. There it is. And preview. Whoa, see how it's twisting? Okay, now look how we have more than one option. We can go to next. So there's more than one result. Let me hit close, preview, close, just giving us a warning. Are you sure this is what you want? Go to next, third option, preview. So it seems to be twisting on us. Let's see if we can control that twist. And next, and preview. Okay, so it seems to be twisting on us. I'm looking for a line to reverse it. Close. Let's see. Let me go back to the tutorial. Okay, we have our spine. We have our guide curve 1. We have our profile. And I'm looking for something to flip it, to flip the direction, and I don't see it. I can impose an angle. It doesn't say what angle to use. Let me see what happens if I remove the spine. I'm going to remove the spine, right click, and clear the spine. Hit preview. Yes, it even makes it worse without the spine. So I need to go back in, include a spine, and preview. Okay, so it's sweeping. Instead of the XY plane, oh, I'm using the wrong plane. So my mistake, this whole time I was using the wrong plane. It's supposed to be the ZX plane. So let's go back, learn from my mistakes. Okay, so for direction, it's the ZX plane. So I was using the wrong plane the whole time. And preview. Okay, that's a lot cleaner, right? A lot better. Okay, so let me close. So let me hide the ZX plane. Okay, there it is. Here's the plane. So it's going along the plane, not normal as I said it earlier. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to next, see what other options it gives us. Go to next. So it's telling us there's 4 results. Pick one. And preview, there's 1. So it's telling us, hey, we can generate 4 based on your parameters. We can generate 4 different surfaces. Do you want this one? Go to the next one. Preview. It's the same one. Go to the next one. Preview. Next one. Preview. It looks the same. Next one. Preview. Okay, so based on our parameters and our input, this is the result we're getting. Okay. Also for direction, we should be able to pick a line for direction, pulling direction. All right, so let's hit OK. Let me change the color of this one. Right-click Properties. I'll make it a blue color. And let's go ahead and unhide the original sweep, the first one. So it's a little different shape, as you can see. And we did use a different profile. All right, so let's go back to the tutorial. Oh, and you can also angle it. Okay, so we can also angle with respect to our direction. Okay, so let's go back. We're going to angle it. Okay, so let's go back to our blue surface. Let me hide the green one. Double click on our blue surface, the last surface we created using pulling direction. Okay, so we can change the angle. Okay, so we can, let's go ahead and rotate this. Let's go 40 degrees. Let's see what we get. Preview. See how it rotated upward, counterclockwise. Okay, let's rotate it 90 degrees. And then 3, 2, 1, preview. So you can also rotate. Can't think of a situation where I had to do this in real life outside of the class on an aircraft or vehicle, but you do have the option to rotate. Okay, we can go back down to 0. And there it is. Okay, let's go back. So once again, we have the option to rotate. And I'm not going to cover this positioning. I'm going to skip this portion of it because I'm just as overwhelmed as you are. All right, so I'm going to skip this portion of it. If you want to play with it, positioning, go for it. Okay, so we're going to end this video. Let's go ahead and save it. Let me go ahead and show the other subsurfaces. So I'm assuming on the implicit, we're gonna come back to either this cat part or something similar to it for our second swept surface video involving implicit linear, circular, conic sweeps. All right, so let's go ahead and save this file, save as. Creating surfaces, swept surfaces, and I'll go with complete. And save. Okay, so there it is. So that was swept surfaces. End of video.